Okay, guys, you might have noticed the price of things is like The Wire. So one point on The Wire, guys, where Avon Barksdale, well, actually it wasn't Avon, fuck that.
Yeah, let The Wire go.
No,
let The Wire go.
I'm
Let's just keep it moving.
It's Marlo. It's Marlo. Yeah. You guys, society is like The Wire right now. Remember Marlo Stansfield told everyone the price of the brick is going up. It's going up. And you might have noticed this happening. The gas pump, you might have noticed this happening at the supermarket. This is called inflation. We haven't really talked about it much on Higher Learning. We're going to talk about it now with Marc Goldwein, who is the Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Director of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. I ran across his Twitter, which is a great Twitter, when I was looking for information on inflation. And I thought it would be great for Marc to join us. We thought it would be great for Marc to join us on Higher Learning and help us understand how inflation is affecting the lives of daily Americans and what might be able to be done to stop it. Marc, thank you so much for joining us on Higher Learning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, first question. Explain to people that might not know, like we're children, which we are, what inflation is and how it affects a country's economy.
Sure. So inflation is basically when the prices go up for the same exact goods. And it's not just when one price goes up. This happens all the time, right? The price of apples is higher or the price of gasoline is higher. Inflation is when the price of everything is going up. And so you're buying the exact same stuff and paying more for it.
Gosh, you said it in such an easy way to understand, right? Okay, Marc, should we be scared?
Scared? I don't think we should ever live in fear, but we should definitely be concerned. Inflation right now, depending on which measure you use, is running at like 8.5%. What we aim for is 2 to 2.5%. So we're basically at like 3 or 4 times where we should be. This is the highest it's been, by the way, since 1981. And 1981 was a really crazy inflation time. So I wouldn't say scared, but yeah, we should be concerned. Inflation is really, really high.
You just terrified me.
It's very high. And by the way, inflation has destroyed societies in the past. It's like wiped out whole countries' economies in the past. It is something that's, it can be disastrous to people's everyday lives. Speaking of the 80s and the 70s, for specifically, there was a time when we had crazy inflation. Okay. We'll get to the causes of our current inflation. If we look back into the past, in the 70s, inflation was bad, and the Fed had to take drastic action to get American inflation under control. And it was led by a guy named Paul Volcker at the time, who really became something of a national villain for some of the actions that he took to curb inflation. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened then and what might need to be done now to curb the inflation that we have?
Yeah, I think that starts with understanding why inflation arises. And
Sure.
It can be for a lot of reasons, but mainly it happens when there's too much, in economics terms, we say there's too much demand for the amount of supply in the economy. And when that either has to mean people are spending way too much money or the economy is not producing nearly enough stuff. It could be either or it could be both. But when that happens, the Federal Reserve, who's in charge of controlling inflation, really only has one tool, and that's to get people to slow their spending. And the Federal Reserve gets them to slow their spending usually by raising interest rates. When there's higher interest rates, homes are harder to afford, people's retirement accounts or other values decline, so people have less money to spend from their savings. Ultimately, this trickles into the labor market, and it causes economic pain. And if we do this early, and there's only a little bit of inflation, the Federal Reserve can cause just a tiny bit of pain by getting people to spend less, and that can stop the inflation. What happened in the 70s and 80s is inflation was so far out of control that Paul Volcker felt like the only course of action was basically to drive the economy into a deep recession, to really cut off the spending so much that nobody again would question that the Federal Reserve was willing to do what it took to bring inflation under control. And it did cause a recession, but it also worked. After that, we had 40 years of basically no excessive inflation.
So we have seen the Federal Reserve raise the interest rates at this point. Are we starting to now see things cool off a little bit or go down because of that?
Yeah.
And will they go higher
Right.
to continue in that way?
So through the entire COVID pandemic, the entire kind of first 2 years, the Federal Reserve had cut its interest rate to 0, right? Now its interest rate is a little bit above 1.5. And maybe more importantly, the Federal Reserve has signaled it's probably going to raise it to about 3.5. Maybe it'll go a little bit less, maybe it'll go a little bit more. But that signal is important because, especially in the financial markets, like for people generating mortgages, the signal already starts to set how they set the mortgages. And so it already is having an effect, especially in the housing market. If you wanted to buy a home a year ago, you could probably get a 3% interest rate, maybe 3.5. Right now, 6% is normal rate for a 30-year loan. And so guess what? People aren't buying houses. If they can avoid it, right now they're not. So we're already seeing the cool down there. We are seeing cool downs in other sectors of the economy, but it's hard to tell how much of that is interest rates and how much of that is what's going on with oil prices related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Mark, you hit a
He's
nerve.
making that face.
You just buy a home?
Go ahead, tell him.
No, Mark, you hit a nerve. Rachel just bought a home. She didn't buy a home. She bought a mansion with a pool.
No, I did not.
She
I did not. But
Mark.
I got good interest rates. I got locked in right before they just started to really shoot up again.
I've been admiring your bookshelf and your background this entire time so far. So,
Mark, you should see
I'm glad.
You should see the pool.
Honestly, I have the best luck with interest rates. We put our offer on our house on, I forget, March 1st, 2020. And then we got the loan like right before April 1st when everyone thought the economy was going to go into a deep depression. And I got like the best interest rate in the whole world. I'm really lucky on that.
Oh.
So
good for you, Mark.
Good for you, Mark.
But then I was locked in that house for the next 2 years. So you win some, you lose.
So let's talk about, before we get to gas, let's talk about specifically some of the back and forth right now on what people believe caused this little spike of American inflation that we're having right now. Okay. You hear from both sides of people, and it's a highly politicized issue. You hear, hey, the decision to give Americans cash while we were inside caused inflation, right? That drove things up, caused inflation. You also hear that a lot of the supply chain problems that we're having right now cause inflation. You're hearing, hey, maybe it was some of Trump's tariffs and the prices on goods as a result of the tariffs that Trump implemented that caused inflation. Was it one of those things more than the other, or was it the combination of those things that got us to where we are right now?
Look, all of these things have to come together, but I think there's really two causes. One of you can think of as the 2021 inflation, and the other you can think of as the 2022 inflation. The 2021 inflation, I think to a large degree, really was the stimulus we sent people. Not the money we sent in 2020 when people were locked in their homes, but the money we spent just as the reopening was happening, right? Just as people were starting to get back to normal, there were vaccines, schools were reopening. We sent a family of $7,000. We sent a new round of unemployment checks. We sent states that were already running surpluses big amounts of federal aid. And immediately, that money showed up in the spending data. In April, purchases of cars went through the roof, for example. We immediately saw that. And that probably caused a lot of the inflation in 2021. Now, things were not getting back to normal of their own, but things were starting to stabilize, I think, at an elevated rate, maybe 4% or inflation a year, which is still twice what it's supposed to be, but better. And then we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the international response. And that's probably spiked it. That's really responsible for a lot of the 2022 inflation, because that took an already bad inflation situation and it added to it the highest oil prices we've seen, in modern history, and higher food prices and all sorts of other chaos to the economy.
How, though? What specifically about the Russian invasion of Ukraine ended up making Americans feel it in their wallets?
The biggest factor was basically there's less oil available and less natural gas available for purchase. For us, it's more oil, but it's a global market, so it all matters. The international community came together and sort of cut off Russia from some markets. And from a sort of international peace perspective, that's probably a good thing. But from a price perspective, it means there's less oil out there but there's still the same amount of driving that people want to do, right? People still want to purchase the same amount of stuff. In fact, because we're still doing pretty financially well from all the money we had in 2021, people are actually spending more than normal. They're doing more flights, more car trips, et cetera. And so if there's less oil, but people still want the same amount or more, the price is going to go up. And so that's the biggest area we're seeing in it. We're seeing similar things in a lot of kind of food. There's a lot of wheat that's grown, for example, and other grains that are grown in Ukraine and Russia. Vodka prices are up. So we're seeing it in food as well. Yeah, I mean, we all have seen it when we go to the store to get our weekly vodka, right? But oh, you guys don't do that? But it's mainly appearing in gas prices. And the problem with gas is that's an input price to everything else, right? Because any kind of good, there's shipping associated with it. Either the shipping you do or the shipping between stores and warehouses. If it's a service, people are still kind of having to commute. So those gas prices are trickling through everything else. And that didn't cause the inflation, but it took an inflation that was bad, but stabilizing it and turned it into a situation that was really bad and not stable at all.
So, Mark, it was trending on Twitter today that the price of Arizona iced tea had gone from 99 cents to $1.29. Did you see this?
I didn't.
I didn't. That's fucking hilarious.
But it didn't. Okay, they were mixing up the U.S. dollar with the Canadian dollar. But it's not true. It's a whole NPR thing wrote an article about it. People were going wild thinking that the price had gone up 30 cents, but it raised this bigger question of, it's still 99 cents, but how much longer can these companies stick to these fixed price items? How much longer can they hold out? Will we see, our beloved Arizona iced tea jump up in 30 cents more or things like that?
Yeah. So these kinds of fixed prices is one reason that you rarely see sort of medium inflation. You either see low inflation or high inflation because they'll want to stick to 99 cents as long as they can, right? There's no benefit of them raising from 99 cents to $1.05. If they're going to raise, it's because they're raising to $1.25 or $1.50. And so some of these prices are going to be sticky, but when they unstick, they're probably going to unstick by a significant amount. The other thing companies can do, and we see this at McDonald's, is something called shrinkflation. You charge the same price, but the McDouble, it used to be a double cheeseburger with 2 slices of cheese. Now it's the McDouble with only 1 slice of cheese, right? Oh. Or now instead of 5 ounces of meat, it's 4 ounces of meat. So they do things to give you a slightly smaller product or a worse product for the same price. That's also inflation. It's just less visible inflation. You don't see it as much, but the nerds at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they do measure that kind of inflation as well.
What number from your calculations? What interest rate number will we have to hit to see our current inflation affected?
Well, I think as we raise interest rates, it's going to be affected. The question is what interest rate to get inflation back down to the Federal Reserve's target of 2%? That's a really tough question. That's the $1 trillion question. But at minimum, the interest rate is going to have to be higher than the inflation rate significantly. So
wow.
And that doesn't mean 9.5% because as we raise,
I was about to say, shit.
As we raise the interest rate, hopefully the inflation rate's going to come down, right? So hopefully they're going to converge. So right now, there's different measures of inflation, but the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation right now it's at 6.5%, and their interest rate at 1%, 1.5%. Maybe as they raise it to 2.5%, it goes down to 4.5%. So I don't know where they're going to converge, but they will have to converge somewhere for the inflation rate to get down to 2%. Gun to my head, being forced to guess, I would say we're going to have an interest rate of 4% or higher. Maybe 4.5% if we want to get inflation down. But I also think there's a chance that the Federal Reserve
does that guarantee a recession?
I think it makes it very likely. So I think there's a chance. I think there's a chance the Federal Reserve is going to look at the situation. They're going to do enough interest rate hikes to get the interest rate down to inflation rate down to 3%. And they're going to say, well, we're shooting for 2%, but 3% is pretty good. And let's stick here for a while and see if we can get the economy moving. Then maybe go a little further. So I think there's a chance that to avoid a recession, they'll accept an inflation rate that's a bit higher than their target because
the administration won't accept a recession. I think the administration is going to want to avoid a recession at all costs.
I'm sure they'll want to, but they may not be in control of this. And I got to say, a lot of the ideas that they're throwing out, frankly, are going to make the situation worse. Like this gas tax holiday, this is going to save people like 8 cents at the pump, and it's going to have to cause the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates more. It's going to increase the likelihood of a recession.
How do you feel like the administration is handling all of this?
Not great. There are some things they're doing that I think would be very helpful. I don't think supply chains are really the main story here, but they've been doing a good job trying to clear up some of the supply chain issues. It was good that they released some oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but overall, I don't think they're ready to admit that part of the problem was we put too much cash to the economy all at one time. And until they can admit that, they can't. Till you admit the source of your problem, you can't solve it. And they keep proposing solutions that are actually adding to that, like the gas tax holidays, like student debt cancellation, all sorts of stuff that's actually going to make it worse.
Ooh,
so
yes, Mark, you wrote an article about that. Speak on that. I was going to ask you about that. You said it's bad for 85% of Americans.
Yeah.
Speak on.
Yeah. So here's the situation. 13% of Americans have student debt. For some of them, it really is crippling and they really need relief, especially Americans that didn't finish college and have the debt and didn't finish it. And so we should figure out how to, and I have a lot of ideas, but it's a whole other podcast, how to help those folks. A lot of that 13% is doing quite well. They have college degrees, advanced degrees, law degrees, medical degrees. They're earning high amounts of money. If we effectively send them $10,000 of cash, which is what this is be, they're going to go out and spend it. That's going to make the inflation situation worse. That is going to raise everybody's prices. And so basically, we're going to make 13% of people better off. Of that, 3% really needed it. The other 10% didn't need it, but they're going to spend the money to make the other 87% face higher prices.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, I would have been part of the people who spent it. We've had the student loan discussion here, and I get make people upset every single time I talk about not paying them. So,
look, I mean,
go ahead.
It's great if you have student debt. It's great to not have to pay it back. It's I would love $10,000, but when you're thinking about the entire economy, you need to consider what putting more money into an economy we're already spending more than we can produce is going to do to the inflation.
Do you know what the problem with that is, Mark? And we're about to run up into, you're about to become a cancer on the left, Mark. I'm not sure where you are, but they're going to look at you and they're going to say, Mark doesn't want to cancel our student loans. The problem with the problem with that is, for me, I'll just be honest with you, see what you think about this. Throw this out at you, Mark, is that there are a high percentage of Black and brown people with these loans that, in my opinion, are predatory and could really use the debt cancellation, the debt forgiveness, however you want to put it. So I guess the question is there a sweet spot? Mark, I believe in sweet spots. You ever eat an M&M?
I love M&M. Yeah, sure. Price is going up.
Stop, Mark. Stop being negative.
It's actually the same price, but now you just get M&M minis.
You just get the minis.
No! What did you call it? Shrinkflation?
Shrinkflation. There's a lot of women out there that go through shrinkflation.
Man, make your point.
So what I'm saying is there a sweet spot of loan forgiveness or cancellation that can affect some of the Americans that are most vulnerable to this, but not affect the overall American economy in a way that is counterproductive to everyone? Because you said that maybe there is, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think there is. Look, we're never going to get it perfect, because when was the last time Washington ever got anything perfect?
Of course.
But I think the three angles to think about here are, first of all, what are the truly predatory loans? And there's a lot of, the administration's been actually doing a good job kind of going through one by one and finding the colleges that are really just scams. Some of them have, since shut down. Cancel those loans. I think we can do that. The administration's starting to do that. Let's do that more. The second is there's something called income-based repayment. It already exists, but it's a mess. Nobody even understands how it works or if they're in it. But we can clean it up. We can clean it up somewhat with administrative actions, more if we're going to actually do legislation. We can get people in it that are supposed to be in it. What it effectively does is it caps how much you have to pay of your income to loans in any given in any given year. It also has an exemption based on, if you're making less than 150% of the poverty, you're paying nothing. And then after a certain time period, it wipes away whatever's left. So we got to fix that. But then the third thing is, this is getting way off the inflation, but I'm going to get back to it a little bit, is that the problem here is actually college affordability, right? Canceling debt is about solving a problem we already did. It's a windfall for people that already got the degree. But the problem is we're just going to have a new generation of people that are entering college and actually facing even higher tuitions. Because if people think there's going to be debt cancellation every presidency, every 4 years, they're going to take out more in debt. Colleges are going to see that. They're going to hike tuition more. They're going to offer more degrees that are either useless or just not worth the return. So we actually need to get to this affordability thing. College doesn't need to be 4 years for everyone. Colleges should be offering 3-year bachelor degrees that are more no frills. We don't need, every university to be sort of a fancy spa. We don't need so much administrative spending. We need them to accept advanced placement credits and IB credits so people can get more credit in high school for college. There's all sorts of things we can do in the front end to hold colleges and universities accountable. To me, just canceling everyone's debt across the board is a cop-out. It's saying we're not going to deal with the problem that colleges and universities are charging too much. We're just going to put this one-time Band-Aid on it. The Band-Aid's actually maybe infected, so it's maybe going to make the problem worse going forward, and kick it to a future president, future Congress to deal with it. And I just think that's the wrong approach.
Marc, if we don't get this under control under this administration, and let's just say Biden doesn't win again in 2024 and we have a whole new administration come in, is that going to be, do you think, and I guess this is a hypothetical, but do you think that is going to make things worse? If we don't get it done in the next year and a half, is it going to make it worse?
Well, let me say this. I think that what we've seen in societies throughout history that suffer long periods of very high inflation is often it leads to like a lot of political problems. And our political system is already a mess. Often it leads to demagogues to come to power. Often it leads people to look for quick fix solutions that are not very good. That doesn't always happen. I think in the 80s, all we just had was a horrible recession, but otherwise things were okay. But I think there's a lot of potential political damage, like not political damage, little political, like big political damage to our society if this goes on for too long. Now, is 2 years or 3 years too long for that? I don't know. This may just be more of the same kind of political damage we've been having recently. But I do think there's a balancing act here, because if we want to get inflation under control without causing a recession, and that may mean accepting a period of time that inflation is declining, but it's still high.
So last question for me. Bill Maher was on the show, and he was echoing actually some of your sentiments, saying that sending people some of the stimulus checks that we sent them contributed to inflation. Crystal Ball, which is a great name. I don't know if you saw this clip. Crystal Ball, she's a political commentator, pundit, if you will. She shot back that there was also $1 trillion, I think it was around $1 trillion pumped into Wall Street around 2020 at the time that the stock market was in tatters. That around the time coronavirus started to cause some global panic in the market, so February 2020, March 2020, that we shot $1 trillion into Wall Street to stabilize things a little bit and try to get ahead of some of the financial instability that COVID might bring us. And that nobody talks about that and how that might have affected inflation, but they want to talk about extra money for Americans that might want to, buy a car or pay off a loan or something like that. How do you think those two things compare to one another?
So we didn't send $1 trillion to Wall Street. We did actually say we were going to depending on how you measure it, send something along that magnitude. But the Federal Reserve never actually sent most of that money. It turned out it was in the tens of billions. The bigger gift to Wall Street actually was these low interest rates. When interest rates are close to zero, it basically causes stock values to go way up. And that's what we saw with the stock market. And I do think that contributed to a lot of our inflation. People with a lot of money felt even wealthier because their portfolios went up 30, 40%. And guess what? They spent that wealth. So I do think the very low interest rates boosting the stock market has been a big contributor to inflation. The difference between that and the checks to some degree is we've actually solved for that already with the higher interest rates. So I don't know if you've seen the stock market recently, but basically all those gains have now been have been wiped away. Yeah, it's not pretty. So the Federal Reserve, I think, is doing what it's supposed to do to unwind those gains, and the stock market is going down, and basically has adjusted for inflation. The stock market has lost all of its gains from the pandemic.
Wow.
Those checks are also being spent down now. So like those checks aren't a forever problem. But meanwhile, the fear now is what was this one-time boost in demand from the high stock values and also from the checks and also from the mighty business in the States is going to start to embed in the economy because people are going to see it's 8.5% inflation, and they're going to start expecting that inflation is going to be higher. Maybe they're not going to expect 8.5%, but they're going to expect 4%. If they start expecting that, they're going to start asking for higher raises. They're going to start being more willing to pay more for products. Businesses are going to start raising prices more. So the biggest fear isn't this one-time demand boost, whether it's from stock values or from household balance sheets. It's that it sets in motion this ongoing inflation that continues even once people aren't having that elevated income anymore.
Fantastic.
Last question from me, Mark. Last question. Did inflation kill crypto? Are we done?
Actually, that's the thing that could get me really in trouble is if I opine on my views on crypto.
Give it to me. It's a scam.
We're not for it. We're not pro crypto on this podcast.
I would say I hope so. I think actually high interest rate killed crypto. I think that crypto seemed artificially attractive because interest rates were near zero. And I don't want me to be so negative on the Fed cutting rates. I think that was absolutely the appropriate thing for them to do in 2020 was to cut rates to zero. But just because something is the right thing to do doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences. And one of the consequences is people were searching for yield. And they were searching in some pretty dumb places, right? Like some of it was they were searching in stocks that turned out to not be that valuable, like Peloton. But some of it was that they were searching for things that had literally no value, right? No value, like Dogecoin. And, I'm just waiting for Pogs to come back.
So let me ask you a question. Can crypto exist with a higher interest rate? Does a high interest rate mean, in your opinion, the death of crypto?
Death is a strong word, but I think that with a high interest rate, crypto is going to be a lot less attractive. And Pogs will be less attractive.
Marc Goldwein, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's great.
You've made us a lot smarter. We understand the issues now. Thank you so much, Marc. Where can they find you? What are you doing? Tell them about yourself before we get out of here.
Yeah, sure. Check out crfb.org. We're the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. And check me out on Twitter at Marc Goldwein. I have lots of opinions about Pogs, no opinions about crypto.
All right. Peace, brother. Thank you for joining us today on Higher Learning.
Thank you so much.